So in August of 2019, we found out that we were pregnant for twins. It was very uncertain time for us, and we had a lot of worry because we already had 3 kids, so we weren't really knowing what to expect with 2 more coming along. Um, the other thing that made us so nervous is I had complications in pregnancy prior to, so especially with carrying twins. We were a little worried, but through the next few months, everything seemed to be going great. I had a wonderful physician, and everything was going wonderful until about 30 weeks. Very unexpectedly, I went into labor, and there was no way of stopping it, and the doctor said they're coming today. They arrived, and one of the twins, Hunter, he was not able to breathe on his own. And Daniel, he was actually the better of the two in that circumstance at birth. But luckily, Hunter was able to come off the ventilator within 24 hours, and it was just a waiting game. We were expecting some ups and downs, as you would with preemies in the NICU. But in some weeks later, Daniel started developing jaundice, which is typically normal in a lot of infants in circumstance. So it wasn't anything that we were too alarmed about until the point where they couldn't get his bilirubin levels to come back down. They would come down and then they would go back up, and they started becoming kind of alarmed of this scenario. And then he started receiving blood transfusions, and they were, at this point, they were just trying to figure out like what was causing this. So later in some weeks, they spent 37 days in the NICU, and they were able to come home. Daniel was still jaundiced whenever he was discharged from the hospital, and we were just going to be monitoring his levels with our pediatrician. About a week after we got out, we went back into the pediatrician's office because Daniel was just really looking yellow. He had that very jaundiced look on his skin, and so she went ahead and did some tests, and we talked about the possibilities of what would come with those results. And I live about 20 minutes away from the doctor's office, and after we had left, I hadn't even made it home whenever she called me, and she said, "I've already contacted New Orleans. I've spoken to a specialist there. You'll need to get Daniel over there now." So I called my husband, and we made the arrangements to go, and we went on our way within a few hours. This was also a time, it was early of 2020, and we were so focused on the boy's health that we really hadn't paid attention to what was going on with COVID. So when we arrived in New Orleans, there was things were being shut down. They weren't allowing more than one parent to go into the hospital, which meant I went into the hospital and my husband had to stay at a hotel with basically a newborn infant by himself. And it was a lot of back and forth on the phone, speakerphone, whenever he couldn't even be there, with the doctors doing test results, and it was just a very confusing and scary time for us. What they were looking at with Daniel was something called biliary atresia, which we weren't too familiar with it, but reading up on it and what they were explaining to us, the statistics were scary. And knowing that if he had this, we didn't really know where his future health-wise would be. It was a likely chance that he would have to have a liver transplant. So we went into the hospital on Thursday, and Friday they began running the test to just to see if this is definitely what that was. And one of the things with biliary atresia is his liver ducts and his bile ducts are completely blocked. Or in a patient that has this, they're completely blocked, and it can cause prolonged liver damage, which could eventually cause liver transplant and liver failure. So on Friday, they did a gallbladder scan, and the doctor came back and said, we're fairly sure that he has biliary atresia because he has 100% blockage. So we're going to plan to do surgery on Monday. We're going to go in there and we're going to do a liver biopsy in what's called a Kasai procedure. And in that procedure is complete reconstruction of the ducts. And most of the time when they have these procedures, anywhere from 1 month to 5 years, it's almost indicative that they have a liver transplant. So it was really scary for us, not knowing what to do. And of course I had a wonderful support. My parents live in Oklahoma. They immediately came down that weekend because they wanted to come help, and we were told my husband Shannon would be allowed in the room, like in the waiting room for the procedure. So they were going to come watch Hunter in the hotel room. And then of course I had support from my church, and this time I called Miss Sharon Artizone for just lots of guidance and prayer. Over the weekend, waiting for Monday for the procedure, she had sent me, I don't even know how many, prayers from the prayer team, individual people. And there was a lot of praying and praying for comfort, praying for guidance during this time for just all of us. But I actually took all the individual prayers from the prayer team and wrote them each on an index card and placed it around his bassinet in the hospital. He actually went to surgery with those prayers surrounding him. That Sunday, my parents decided to attend service here at Crossroads because they were doing a special prayer service for Daniel that morning. And it was actually the last Sunday that church was open before they were shut down for COVID. And it was also the first Sunday that the song The Blessing was introduced. My parents were in the service with some of my family. After the service, they would come to New Orleans. But I knew this was happening, so they were able to FaceTime me while I was in the hospital room with Daniel and let me watch everything, because I really wanted to see it. And they started singing The Blessing, and they started praying over Daniel and our family. And it was such a precious, precious moment. I could feel the presence of God. And people that I spoke with that were there that Sunday said just the presence of God was just very, very thick. And I believe it. And at that moment, while that blessing was how I felt being sung to us and to Daniel, I picked him up out of his bassinet in that hospital room. He's still attached to all his IVs. And I just held him so close, and I fell to the floor as close as I could get without squishing him. And I started praying and said, God, I don't know why we're here in this moment, but all I know is that I trust you, and I'm willing to give him back to you if that's what you want. I had to come to peace knowing that I could lose my son. And I had to be okay with that because of the faith and trust I have in him for our story and our lives, and Daniel's story and Daniel's life. And I just gave him back to God. So the next morning comes around and it's time for surgery, and he's wheeled down there with his prayer surrounding him. And they had said it could be a 4 to 5 hour surgery. And we sat in that waiting area, me and my husband. In an hour and a half, the doctor came back, and I was kind of worried. And she came and said, I don't know how to explain this. And my heart kind of dropped. She said, I don't know how to explain this, but there's no blockage. It's the most beautiful biliary tree we've ever seen. We just did a liver biopsy, and we sewed him up, and he's in recovery. And as soon as he starts to wake him up, we'll bring him out to you. To us, that was nothing short of a miracle. We truly believe the hands of God were placed on Daniel. And that's why this song, The Blessing, means so much to me. It is a reminder of his blessings and his comfort and his promises. It is a song that is played in remembrance, in happiness, in times of trouble that we faced since then, that we're just able to be reminded through worship. It's such an intimate place to be with God. How worship can bring us together through just a song, through music, and that's what the blessing means to us.